The feds are cracking down on international study permits following months of calls to do so because rising rates over the past several years are putting a strain on housing markets. The overall number of permit holders has tripled since 2015. Take a look at this on your screen, hitting about 900,000 last year. But many of those students are on multi-year permits, so reducing numbers will take time. In 2023, more than 559,000 permits were issued. Today, the feds announced new study permits will be capped at 364,000 in 2024 for a national overall reduction of about 35%. But when you break it down province by province, in some provinces like Ontario, that'll mean a 50% cut. I spoke with Immigration Minister Marc Miller right here in Montreal following that announcement. Have a listen. Hi, Minister. Good to see you in person.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you making the time. I wanted to talk to you first about the announcement that you made today, and specifically, exactly a week ago, I was interviewing about the prospect of a cap, and you said sometime in the first quarter to first half of the year, you'd be examining, based on the province's reaction, if you needed to impose one. 7 days later, you've announced a substantial one. What changed in the interim?
Well, first, we've been doing some work on this for some time, and as soon as I became minister, there were talks around the last cabinet retreat about putting a national cap in, and I had said that this is like doing surgery with a hammer, and that we needed to do some work internally to shore up the issues around fraud, around verifying offer letters that go out, and really some very integral system of the federal role in this part of the international student system, which is split between us and the province's regulation of designated learning institutes. Clearly, we wanted to send a message to provinces to say that you have time to clean this up, but it's coming. So we've been doing work throughout the fall to look at what a cap would be, what it would be by province, and look at fairness within the system. It's clear that there are a number of provinces that have had a disproportionate amount of students come into the country and bear a disproportionate amount of the responsibility to clean it up. So it's been some work that's been in progress, and the question was whether we announce this early in the first quarter or later on. So the work had been done, and I think the time was appropriate to get this out in and around the cabinet retreat. But it very well could have been last week, or it could have been a couple weeks from now.
I guess what I wonder is there something that the provinces could have done in the interim that would have prevented you from making this announcement? Because as you mentioned, you also floated it in the summer, waited until just before Christmas to make another set of announcements around fraud, as you indicated, and then just a month later came out with this. Like, is there something they could have done that would have not had you impose this cap?
Well, I think if we had seen a significant amount of movement from a number of the provinces in question, we probably would have been able to wait a bit. But obviously, given the numbers that we see increasing and the fact that there's a lot of applications in the system, it's something that we needed to act on right now. There is currently now a freeze on applications until provinces get their acts together and have an application support system where they will give us a letter for each application by March 31st. So the clock's ticking. And in the meantime, there will be some, I think, really robust discussions with provinces to make sure that they have a plan to attack fraud and attack the integrity of the system that's been really compromised by not only the volume, but the quality and the types of institutions that are supporting people coming to this country. And we see stories, anecdotal, but it seems to affect the entirety of the system of students that don't have proper housing, are going to food banks in some situations, and aren't really taking the educational experience seriously. They're fake commerce degrees in Brampton and Mississauga, and people are just using it as a backdoor entry into Canada. That's unfortunate, and that is not what the visa program was intended to in the first place.
You mentioned, though, that the numbers, since you floated the idea in the summer, continued to go up. And it's in that vein, I'm wondering, thinking particularly about the impact on the rental market and access not only for those international students, but other Canadians as well. Rents in the past 2 years have gone up by a total of 22%, or an average of $390 per month. Do you regret in hindsight not introducing a cap earlier, even this summer, when you recognized that the problem was as acute as it is?
It's hard to look. Hindsight is what it is. It's of precious little value when you're in government and need to act. I would think, looking back, if we had imposed a cap, it might not have been as aggressive as it was today, or even as well thought out. Clearly, there was some work we needed to do federally to make sure that we were getting rid of some of the worst aspects of fraud, making sure that people had enough money to come to Canada. We were verifying offer letters. We trust the designated learning institutions and the provinces that regulate them. And clearly, with the numbers getting out of control, we needed to act and put the responsibility in provincial hands where it lies.
And pardon the interruption, and I'm not trying to remove the province's jurisdiction from any of this, or their culpability, or the line of questioning or accountability toward them, but those numbers just didn't come about overnight. They were substantially higher in the past 2 years, 800,000 in 2022, as you have pointed out, 900,000 in 2023. And over the time you've been in office, they've tripled, other than the year of the pandemic when there was a blip. So I understand your point around hindsight, but when we're trying to make sure that our government is as informed as possible in the policies it pursues in the future, I think it's normal for Canadians to wonder, why is this something that you've just decided overnight now is a big deal? Is it because there's a housing issue and there's political pressure on your government?
Well, first I'd say a couple things. We've been having international students in this country for the balance of 40 years without having a cap. So saying this is a relatively recent event is actually true. I'm not into excuses. Excuses are only helpful in order to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But clearly there's been an increase since we opened up the taps after shutting them off completely during COVID, with a lot of institutions crying out on the financial impacts that this has had on them. It is no secret to anyone that provinces have been underfunding the post-secondary institution sector massively for years, and institutions have been smart and reacted accordingly. So that's something we are composing with, and composing with means we have to take the right policy we have to make right policy choices in the context. Now, international students aren't responsible for the increase of housing prices alone, or really the affordability crisis that has plagued this country recently.
But temporary residents
absolutely,
are a part
and in sectoral areas, in areas in Ontario, for example, or in BC, where it has gotten out of control, you do have an impact on the rental market, or people converting their own houses into rental units, and that does jack up the price. Now, this announcement alone was not a housing announcement. It will not solve the housing crisis that we are currently in, but volume is volume. The reduction of the volume will have an impact in significant markets where we've seen this run out of control.
Let me ask you more broadly speaking, as the minister who oversees immigration, if you believe that the immigration policy your government is pursuing is in line with the absorptive capacity of the economy right now?
I think we have to be careful when we talk about what absorptive capacity is. It's often been a catchphrase for, I see a problem here, there, and there, and I'm going to associate it with immigrants. I'm not casting aspersions on anyone that uses the term, because I use it myself, but it's something that is rarely measured. We have seen impacts of immigration on housing. We've seen the impact of immigration on healthcare. And we've seen the impact on the education system. But we often fail to look at the other side of the equation, which is the labor shortage that immigration has solved. We are an aging population. The Deputy Chief of the Bank of Canada, Tony Gravel, has said that this government has done an exceptional job in making the population younger. The demographic chart in Canada keeps me up at night, but compared to other similarly situated governments, we have done a remarkable job in making it younger. So I think it's something that is important. Immigration is one of the measures that we need to use and persist in using to make sure that we keep having a ratio of people that are working to those that are retiring, in order to be able to pay for all the services that we expect to, and is a badge of our identity as Canadians. So it's a conundrum, and I don't deny it, and I don't want to underplay the severity of the housing crisis, but I think it's something we can do in a strategic, mature way without getting into sort of partisan politics and stigmatizing
right,
immigrants.
And I mean, certainly the genesis of my question is in no way meant to do that. I think actually the reason I'm asking is for the converse, because public opinion polling has showed, only very recently has Canadians' attitudes towards immigration started to shift a little bit because of their perception that it is impacting their ability to afford a home or to afford their rent. There are a number of economists, big chief economists at the big banks, who very recently have said Canada is caught in a population trap. They have acknowledged exactly what you said, that immigrants have been an integral part of building our labor force, making the homes that we're now upset that we can't afford. But at the same time, they say that the absorptive capacity is not there. Stéphane Marion at the National Bank says you've got to cut immigration to 400 to 500,000 people a year. based on what the number of housing starts in this country right now, based on the level of healthcare, the education system. Is it your assessment that he is wrong? Do you believe the levels that you have right now, both on the temporary and permanent sides, are able to be absorbed by the economy?
Well, you don't have to look at me to see the counter-narrative. The Royal Bank of Canada and Desjardins have offered counter-narratives on this. Economists deal with volumes, and I think we have to respect those analyses. As politicians, particularly in the immigration space, we deal with human beings, and I think the analyses on the demographic curves are quite clear. If we don't address this now as a country, we will face huge problems in the next 10 years. Linking this to housing is an important discussion, and I think we can do this in a mature, reasoned way. If you look at other countries that do not have the housing crises that we do, they also have issues with immigration. There are winds that are blowing against the Canadian consensus. The polling and the sophisticated analyses that we are seeing don't necessarily show a rise in xenophobia. It exists. We need to acknowledge that. But what they're showing is that federal governments, provincial governments, territorial governments, municipal governments need to get their acts together when it comes to immigration in planning better, whether that's housing, whether that's healthcare, whether that's targeted immigration levels.
And I get that in the long term, but that housing hasn't been done so far. At the provincial level, at the federal level, at the municipal level. It doesn't exist at the moment. I'm not asking about our sort of ideological stance on immigration in the long term. I'm asking in the short term, do your immigration targets line up with what the economy can bear?
I believe so. I mean, we simply have to look at the labor shortages that exist that we need to plug in a relatively expedient fashion in order to address issues that could be much worse. If you look at a looming recession, bringing down levels could have unintended consequences that Canadians would be much worse off for. Immigration has been one of the sole drivers of the labor force increases in this country, of our gross domestic product. Again, it comes with a conundrum and some challenges, but I think it's something that we are, as a country, up to in facing as a challenge. Clearly, Canadians have said at the Canadian level, with respect to Immigration Canada, RCC, we need to work on processing times better, have more tailored opportunities for people to come in and targeted for the demand that exists in the country, as opposed to entertaining hope and giving people points for their accreditations or their skill set, and then just sort of dumping them here and letting them figure it out for themselves. When it comes to provinces, we give 3-year immigration levels that get hotly debated, but those levels give a prediction for 3 years. Provinces don't necessarily react accordingly to those numbers that are come out and invest in housing and invest in healthcare. So tying those together is important because, again, we're one country and we need to be able to face this in a mature, reasoned way.
Unfortunately, running out of time. I just have one final question from the federal perspective. And again, I'm not trying to take the hook off the provinces for their line of accountability here. Do I infer from what you said or interpret from what you said that you are not entertaining reducing target levels for any other stream of either permanent or temporary immigration beyond what you've done today?
I would say quite clearly we are not looking at a reduction at the permanent levels. We are looking at levels that always reflect the needs of the country and what the economy is telling us to do, as well as what Canadians are telling us to do. It's no secret that we are in a war with, Ukraine is in a war with Russia right now, and we are still have outstanding visas that Canadians wouldn't forgive us for welcoming Ukrainians that are fleeing war. That's just the reality that we may have to compose with if we see an increase of people that are here temporarily, including those fleeing war.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Vashi.